Hi everyone, it's me, Tim, and today I want to talk about game economy. This is partially based on the video I did on equipment durability, but specifically because a YouTube commenter, Anjin Filipovic 2851 asks, money imbalance is a huge deal. Having lots of money like Scrooge McDuck after 30% of gameplay makes games super easy even on the hardest difficulty. So I do not get how this is not super important to fix before shipment. So that made me want to talk about game economy and how hard it is. I could lecture, this could be a whole college course. I mean, you've taken economy, game economy is equally difficult. I could teach for a whole quarter, have whiteboards and materials to pass out. So what I'm going to do is give a very big overview right now of game economy and what knobs exist to be twisted. But let me answer. I'm going to say how I answered Anjin in the comments. Basically, there are three reasons money imbalance doesn't get fixed on the Outer Worlds, in Arcanum, in Fallout, in almost any RPG I've ever played, probably every RPG I've ever played. And I think those three reasons boil down to this. One, you have to basically do economy late in the game because all the other systems that go into economy have to be done. Just like optimization, if you try to do a balance pass on economy too early in game development, you're just opening yourself up to a world of hurt. But by the time economy is something you should be looking at, this is the part of the game where bugs like crash bugs and bugs that prevent the player with a particular character build from reaching the end of the game, that's where those bugs take priority. So those are always going to be done before economy. The second reason, fixing a money imbalance often means changing other systems. And I'll talk about sources and sinks, but until you have all these systems like vendors and loot drops and quest rewards and crafting, and all those factor into the economy. To balance the economy often means changing one or more of those systems, and there may not be time to do all those, especially to make those changes and then test them. So often, because those systems in a vacuum work, frequently it's like, we'll just leave those alone, and yes, the player is going to end the game with a lot of money. And then third, it's a very complex issue. And not only do the developers working on a game may not agree on what things to change, what you may change may depend on what the player's build is. Depending on their class or what skills they picked, parts of the economy may hit them harder than others, and I'll talk about that. But what this means is sometimes the changes that you have to do in the step two I just mentioned, they don't work, and they just shift the cause of the money imbalance onto something else. So for those three reasons, you often see games, RPGs made, and you finish the game with a lot of money. And you always go, well, why didn't they fix that? It's really hard to fix. So let's talk about game economy as a whole and why it gets so complex. And this is, like I said, this is the part of me talking where I could give lectures on game economy, and I don't even think I'm good at game economy, and I've been working on this problem for 25, 30 years. It's a tough problem. It's like real life economy. Most governments, most countries have not figured this out. So don't feel bad if you go, this is really complicated. I don't know why this is, why no one's figured this out. No one's figured it out, not just game developers. So I view economies in games, and I mentioned this in other videos, like sources and sinks. Some people call it tap and sink, but that always confuses me because it mixes metaphors. Shouldn't it be tap and drain? But I use source and sink. Source is, you can view those and a few other things as the complete element of the economy. Sources are where you get things, not just money. It's where player wealth comes from. It can be things they find in the environment, things they find on the ground, things they find in chests and dungeons, things they harvest off plants, or anything like you can mine minerals. There are also drops, which is anything that you killed to get the item. Whether you killed them and they had it in their inventory, or you killed them and then you could use one of your abilities, like if you kill an animal and you can skin it to get a hide. I consider those drops. And then quests can provide items and money. So can vendors. So can crafting systems. So right there, found, drops, quests, vendors, crafting. Those are the five, what I consider to be the five major sources of player wealth. By the way, I use those sources of player wealth for when I try to do balancing in a game on where the best items are going to come from. This is tangential to economy. This is where you're like making a game, you're like, I want to know when a particular item should be made available to the player. Usually this is done by player level and item type. So imagine you have a spreadsheet with player level bands over here, like 1 through 5, 5 through 10, 10 through 15. And across the top are item types like chest piece, helmet, weapon, pants, shoes, gloves. You can break magic item types into there if you want to. Potions, wands, whatever you have in your game. This is where all the types would be. So now you have the types and the player levels, and in those cells, for every one of those cells, you list one of those sources I just mentioned. So maybe for player level 1 to 5, the best chest armor comes from things they find in the world, on the ground in the chests or harvested. Maybe the best weapons for level 1 to 5 come from creature drops. Maybe the best helmets come from vendors. By the way, sometimes I add an extra type of drop, which is boss drop, which adds an extra source, because in these kind of charts, I like to distinguish drops off regular creatures and then drops off bosses, because you may want to say the best gloves at this level get dropped off a boss. So they're not something that would just happen as you're running around the world. They drop off a boss. If you really want to get crazy, or you want to hire a full-time designer, and this is nothing what he does, into that, instead of a 2D graph, you would make a 3D one. So a 3D cell, a set of cells, because the extra one is class. So that way you can say the best weapon for your wizard class at level 1 to 5 comes from crafting, but the best weapon for your fighter class at level 1 to 5 comes from a boss drop. There are games that make that distinction, and there's reasons to do that. Seriously, that could be a whole class. So those are our sources, our basic sources, and stuff you would do with them besides economy. So let's talk about the sinks. Sinks are anything that take wealth away from the player. This includes vendors. Notice I included vendors as a source, and that's not contradictory. Vendors can be where you get stuff, and they can also be where you sell stuff. Some games are entirely built around that. If you ever played Elite, you found places where a vendor sold something cheaper than where another vendor bought something, and then you just ran back and forth between those two. So you made that a money source. That run was a money source. But vendors can also be sinks, because if you need ammo, food, water, healing supplies, or whatever, you get those from vendors, and that's where your money goes, and then you get these items which are consumables and disappear from the world. So that's a sink. Smiths can be a sink if your world includes repairing. Healers are a sink if your world has places you go to get your health restored, or if you get conditions applied to you or status effects that you need a priest or wizard to remove from you. Those are sinks. Trainers are sinks in a lot of games. Those are places you go where you pay to spend your skill points. A lot of games had trainers for a lot. I think Might and Magic did it. We did something similar in Arcanum where your rank went up, but then your training was something you had to pay for, and that was an orthogonal thing that added to your skills. Some games make you pay to rest or camp, and that's the only way you could get back spells. Pillars did this. Rent. A lot of games charge rent. Either you have your own house and it's rent, or Ultima Online, if you wanted to run a shop, you had to pay a rent on it per month to keep that shop open. Some games also have paid companions, mercenaries, that you pay to be in the group. We did this in Temple, where you either paid them to be in the group or they took certain items from found loot. And those exist as money sinks. There's also one other one that I don't use as much, and I'll talk about this in a minute. But in-game microtransactions that you can use in-game currency for, like buying cosmetic stuff, if it uses in-game currency, that's another sink. I tend not to use that one, but the problem is almost every game out there has more sources than sinks, and the sources are easier to find than the sinks are to avoid. So you find, did I say that right? I'm basically saying it's very easy to take advantage of all the sources, but in a lot of RPGs, it's very easy to avoid all the sinks. You don't have to buy things at a vendor because it's dropping too much. You repair stuff yourself. You heal yourself. Maybe your game doesn't have trainers, or maybe you're being a generalist, so you paid the small amount to have lots of low-level skills trained, and you don't really have any specialties. All of these things are all of the sinks in an RPG are usually avoidable or minimizable. So that leads us to the third part of an economy, which is currency. Now, most people think I'm saying money, but if you've ever played a game where some things that you can carry around are weightless, like ammo for guns or arrows for bows, those are currency. No matter what else you think of them, if you play those games long enough and you don't use the weapons that use that ammo, it's effectively a currency. It's weightless, it builds up in your inventory, and if you're ever at a vendor, you can just convert it to currency immediately by selling it. So there's a lot of currencies floating around those RPGs that are it's equivalent to money, and you can carry it around completely weightlessly, and almost all of them stack, so it's just like money. Now, like I said, the goal of an economy is to balance your source and sinks. I've mentioned how hard this is because it's avoidable, and the reason this is really hard in games to do is for all the classes or skill types, basically the player character types that can be built, you can design one or use one in such a way that you avoid sinks. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're making a fantasy game and you're like, well, arrows use up a lot of ammo, or bows use arrows. People got to buy arrows. Not all classes are going to use bows. Some don't even use armor and weapons. If you have a monk class who basically fights in a pair of shorts and doesn't even use weapons, it's all hand, that person will not only never buy weapons or armor, they'll never have to repair them. That class is almost designed to avoid two big sinks in a fantasy RPG. Also, some difficulty levels in games say, oh yeah, you don't have to worry about eating or drinking or sleeping in this difficulty level. Well, guess what? You just wiped out 3 sinks right there with a difficulty level. So what I'm saying is a lot of thought can be put into an economy to balance it. But if your RPG is also rich in what kind of character a player can make and how their gameplay is, they can always find a way where they're getting all the sources and they're avoiding a lot of the sinks. And that's why this balancing is so incredibly hard. Unlike real life economy, which people still haven't solved, by the way, I have to eat, I have to drink, I have to live somewhere. There are built-in money sinks in our world that just don't exist in RPGs. Now, there's one that players can't avoid, which the original AD&D used, which was when you go up a level, you have to pay for it. The original AD&D used that. It was something like 1,500 gold times the level you're leveling out of. So when you're first level and you can go to second level, it's 1,500. But then when you're second level and you get enough XP to be third, that's 3,000. Then your third level you go up, that's 4,500. That's a lot of money and it adds up. I don't know. I don't think I've met any player who loves that system. And it's one of the truly unavoidable sinks, but nobody likes it. And I don't think I've seen a modern RPG with it. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. There's also another sync source that I don't ever use, and that's the microtransaction around pay to win. And that's where people can use outside currency as a source in the game to buy anything that's not cosmetic. I don't care if it lets you buy a heal potion, if it converts to money you can spend in an auction house to buy weapons, real weapons and armor. If you can convert outside money to inside game wealth, that economy will never be balanced. That effectively, you've thrown a monkey wrench in it and will never be balanced. Also, let me tell you the final reason why I think this is all really hard to balance. So I've described the entire economy, sources, sinks, seems like it should be pretty easy. I have never shipped a game that I have experienced 100% of the content of before ship. There's always a quest, an NPC line, an item, something that I didn't see before we shipped. Even as a game director, and even on the Outer Worlds, where I played that game over a dozen times, I think I played it 16 times from start to finish before it shipped. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One, my character may not have been able to have all the content, may not have been able to see all the content. I like making my games that way, that you don't get to see everything with a particular build. But when I first started playing the Outer Worlds, which was probably about 7 or 8 months before we even shipped, when I started doing my plays to completion, not all the content was in. So I remember watching a speedrunner get into some complex once by jumping on crates that were near an electric fence. Those crates weren't there when I made my playthrough. I remember turning to Leonard and going, look, he got in there on those crates. And afterwards I was like, those crates, I've never seen those crates before. So you may play the game a lot, but because there's 70 people working on it and lots of hands going in there, something may get changed before shipping and you don't actually play it. Because of that, those things can affect the economy as well. All of a sudden, there's a quest that gives a really amazing item and it's repeatable. Or suddenly a change to a rule means you can get a better faction reaction, and suddenly their vendor is giving a lot more money than you had planned for because the player can become so well liked by that faction that they get great deals there. In fact, one thing we always try to make sure in open world RPGs is that items have a particular value that you can never buy them for less than that or sell them for more, because otherwise that could create that buy and sell loop where the player could just go, I'll take all your potions, sell them to him, take all more potions, sell them to him, and then make a ton of money. So even putting those kind of rules in, there are still other ways people can manipulate sources and sinks to just make a lot of money. So what am I saying here? Economy is difficult. I don't think you'll ever see it truly balanced, especially for games that let you play, make, and play how you want, any kind of player character. You will find a way of gaming the system. Yes, many games, including my own, could have been way better balanced before they came out. For all the reasons I stated, they're not. Personally, I don't worry about this too much. The same reason I don't worry about save scumming or, I don't even really worry about cheating that much. Most of my games are single player experiences. You're only cheating yourself out of an experience. If I play a game and I end up with 500,000 gold coins, okay, that's fine. Not saying don't try to do a better job next time on it, but I know the reason that game economies will never be perfect. Whew. Now that's almost 20 minutes. And like I said, that's scratching the surface of game economy. But I hope that answers questions people have about it and also gives you an idea of how economies are even implemented in the first place.